Hey, thank you for coming back to my Patreon page. This is Michael Tanner. I'm going to do the bedtime story stuff for a little while until you get bored or people stop paying for it or there's just an answer that I really am comfortable with or something like that. Anyway, if you really like this, you can just put yourself that little check, the little joy, the little part where you just put your little name and you give the dollar a month, and that really helps. Believe it or not, a dollar a month makes this whole operation go. As our $10 Jeffrey Cox sponsor says, because he is actually in the credits because he boned up $10. Okay, he gave 10 bones. So thank you very much for Jeffrey Cox, and he's part of the official patron family for Michael James Tanner and sci-fi stuff. This tonight is a little bit of fantasy because we all need a little bit of fantasy, a little bit of stress reliever. Maybe later, if I'm lucky, I can get Brave Five to come on out and read some stuff to you. But really, he's just cowering in his room, not able to play games and stuff like that. So we will just let that go for right now, and we won't call him Chicken Fry or something that would be like. Really like how do I say over the top that naming his games like Chicken Kooza or something like that. So but right now we're going to talk about a book that's I think is going to be great. And the way I know it's going to be great is because I have the book in my hand. It's from the local library. And this is The Emperor's Blades by Brian Staveley. It is the Unhewn Throne, whatever that's going to mean. It's not the Game of Thrones, the thing with 1,000 swords in it. Okay, well, this is just the way we start, okay? The sun hung just over the peaks, a silent, furious ember drenching the granite cliffs in a bloody red when Caden found the shattered carcass of a goat. He'd been dodging the creature over the tortuous mountain trails for hours, scanning for tracks where the ground was soft enough, making guesses when he came back to the bare rock, doubling back when he guessed wrong. It was a slow work and tedious, the kind of task that older monks delighted in assigning their pupils. As the sun sank, the eastern sky purpled to a vicious bruise. He started to wonder if he would be spending the night in the high peaks with only his rough-spun robe for comfort. Spring had arrived earlier, according to the Anurian calendar, but the monks didn't pay any heed to the calendar, and neither did the weather, which remained hard and grudging. Scrapes of dirty snow lingered in the long shadows, cold seeped from the stones, and the needles of the few gnarled junipers were still more gray than green. "Come on, you old bastard," he muttered, checking another track. "You don't want to sleep out here any more than I do." The mountains comprised a maze of cuts and canyons and washed-out gullies and rubble-strewed ledges. Caden had already crossed the 3 streams gorged with snow-built, frothing at the hard walls that hemmed them in, and his robe that was damp with spray. It would freeze when the sun dropped. How the goat made it way past the rushing water, he had no idea. "If you drag me around these peaks much longer," he began, but the words died on his lips as he spotted his quarry at last, 30 paces distant, wedged in a narrow defile, only hind corners visible. Although he couldn't get a good look at the thing, it seemed to have trapped itself between a large boulder and the canyon wall. He could tell at once that something was wrong. The creature was still, too still, and there was unnaturalness to the angle of the haunches, the stiffness in the ledges. "Come on, goat," he murmured as he approached, hoping that the animal hadn't managed to hurt itself too badly. The Shin monks were not rich, and they relied on their flocks for milk and meat. If Caden returned with the animal that was injured or worse, dead, his Umail would impose a severe penance. "Come on, old fellow," he said, working on his way slowly down the canyon. The goat appeared stuck, but if it could run, he didn't want to end up chasing it all over the Bone Mountains. "Better grazing down below. We'll walk back together." The evening shadows hid blood until he was nearly standing in it. The pool wide and dark and still. Something had gutted the animal, hacked a savage slice across the haunch and into the stomach, cleaving muscle and driving into the viscera. As Caden watched, the last lingering drops of blood trickled out, turning soft belly hair into sodden, ropey mess, running down the stiff legs like urine. "Shall take it," he cursed, vaulting over the wedge boulder. It wasn't usual for a crag cat to take a goat, but now he'd have to carry the carcass back to the monastery across his shoulders. "You'd better go wandering," he said. "You had—" The words trailed off, and his spine stiffened as he got a good look at the animal for the first time. A quick cold fear blazed across his skin. He took a breath, then extinguished the emotion. Shin training wasn't good for much, but after 8 years, he had managed to tame his feelings. Fear, envy, anger, exuberance. He still felt them, but they did not penetrate so deeply as they once had. Even within the fortress of his calm, however, he couldn't help but stare. Whenever the gutted goat did not stop there, some creature Caden struggled in vain to think of what had hacked the animal's head from his shoulders, severing the strong sinew and muscle with sharp, brutal strokes, only until the stump of the neck remained. Crag cats would take an occasional flagging member of the herd, but not like this. The wounds were vicious, unnecessary, lacking the coordination economy of other kills he had seen in the wild. The animal had not simply been slaughtered, it had been destroyed. Caden cast about, searching for the rest of the carcass. Stones and branches had washed down with an early spring floods and lodged the choke point of the defile in a weed-matted mess of silt and skeletal wood fingers, sun-bleached and grasping. So much detritus clogged the canyon that it took him a while to locate with the head, which lay tossed on its side at a few paces distance. Much of the hair had been torn away and the bones split open. The brain was gone, scooped from the treacher of the skull as though with a spoon. Caden's first thought was to flee. Blood still dripped up from the goat's gory coat, more black than red and in the fading light, and whatever had mauled it could still be in the rocks, guarding its kill. None of the local predators would be likely to attack Caden. He was tall for 17 years, lean and strong, and from half a lifetime of labor. But then, none of the local predators would have hacked the head from the goat and eaten its brain either. He turned towards the canyon mouth. The sun had settled below the step, leaving just a burnt smudge above the grasslands to the west. Already, night filled the canyon like oil seeping into a bowl. Even if he left immediately, even if he ran at his fastest leap, he'd be covering the last few miles to the monastery in full dark. Though he thought he had outgrown his fear of night in the mountains, he'd not relished the idea of stumbling across the rock-strewn path, an unknown predator following in the darkness. He took a step away from the shattered creature, then hesitated. Hank's going to want a painting of this. Forcing himself to turn back to the carnage. Anyone with a brush or scrape of parchment could make a painting, but Shin expected rather more than their novices and alkalites. Painting was the product of seeing, and the monks had their own way of seeing. Seimanam, they called it, the carved mind. It was only an exercise, of course, a step on the long path leading to ultimate liberation of the Vanti. But it had its meager uses. During the 8 years in the mountains, Caden had learned to see, to really see the world as it was. The track of bridled bear, the serration of the fork-leaf petal, the crenellations of the distant peak. He had spent countless hours, weeks, years, looking, seeing, memorizing. He could paint any of 1,000 plants or animals down to the last final feather, and he could internalize the new scene in heartbeats. He took 2 slow breaths, clearing the space in his head, a blank slate on which to carve every minute particular. The fear remained, but the fear was an impediment. He parted it down, focusing on the task at hand. With the slate prepared, he set to work. He took only a few breaths to etch the severed head, the pools of dark blood, the mangled carcass of the animal. The lines were sure to be certain, finer than any brushstroke, and unlike any normal memory, the process left him with sharp, vivid image, durable as stones on which he stood, and no one he could be able to recall and scrutinize it well. He finished with the same element and let it out a long, careful breath. "Fear is blindness," he muttered, repeating the old Shin aphorism, "calmness, sight." The words provided cold comfort in the face of a bloody scene, but now that he had the carving, he could leave. He glanced once over his shoulder, searching the cliffs for some sign of the predator, then turned towards the opening of the defile. As the night's dark fog rolled over the peaks, he raced down the treacherous trail, sandaled feet darting past the down limbs of an ankle-breaking rocks. His legs chill and stiff after so many hours, creeping after the goat, warm to the motion while his heart settled into a steady tempo. "You're not running away," he told himself. "Just heading home." Still he breathed, a small sigh of relief. A mile down the path, he'd rounded a tower of rock, and Talon, the monks called it, and could make out Anxlan in the distance. Thousands of feet below him, the scant stone buildings perched on a narrow ledge as though huddled away from the abyss. Warm lights glowed in some of the windows. There would be a fire in the refectory kitchen. Lamps kindled in the meditation hall. The quiet hum of Shin going about evening of absolution and rituals. Safe! The word rose unbidden in his mind. It was safe down there, and despite his resolve, Caden increased his pace, running towards those few faint lights, fleeing whatever prowled the unknown darkness behind him. Thank you for joining with me. This was Chapter 1 of The Emperor's Blades. Yes, we mashed a couple of words, but if we get somebody to help us edit, and that's one of the $200 doles that we have for the month, we can get a better copy. But for right now, I want to be able to read at least a chapter to you every night, or at least a chapter every week. That concluded page 19, page 16 through 19 of this chapter. Chapter 2, which the chapters are unlabeled, but chapter 2 we hopefully try tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining with me, Michael Tanner, and I hope that you have a great day and you go do something good with your life.